Be good.
Live.
In 5, 4. Oh, Julie's coming in. Okay. I think we're live on Facebook. I think we're recording. You are good to take us away, Kiana.
Awesome. Okay. Well, happy final informational session Sunday to all of our participants here on both Zoom and in the Facebook universe and the internet. My name is Kiana Abadi. I'm a one of the steering committee members of Young Long Island for Justice. Our organization is a part of Long Island United to transform policing and community safety. And this is our final informational session, unless those of you watching want us to take this show on the road and come and present to your individual groups and organizations. I'm going to ask for those of you that are on Zoom, if you have access to your chat, you can provide us, information about who you are, where you're coming from, and what you're most interested to hear. I just want to do some housekeeping rules about, since we're on Zoom, if I would like to direct everyone to the bottom of their Zoom screen so that we can kind of make sure everyone can see, how to mute themselves, how to, I stopped sharing, how to mute themselves, how to take off their video, take their video on, and most importantly, how to access the chat. On the bottom of your screen from the left, you'll see mute, stop video, participants, share, and it should have a chat option. So if you have issues at accessing the chat, that's at the bottom of your screen. That's where it's going to be. That's where we would like for most of our participants to put their questions, so that so that our speakers can answer them in real time, possibly as others are presenting. So without further ado, this is the People's Plan. This is the 3 organizations you see on my screen at the bottom here: Long Island Advocates for Police Accountability, Long Island United to transform policing and community safety, and United for Justice in Policing on Long Island are the 3 main coalitions that have brought the island really together to create a new vision on how we in Nassau and Suffolk County can work better with police or without police. What does community safety really look like for the future of Long Island? These 3 organizations really came together across the island, different backgrounds, different religious beliefs, different community, socioeconomic backgrounds, to really have a comprehensive discussion about community safety and about policing in Long Island. So major shout of applause to the 3 main organizing organizations and their individual leaders. It's a mammoth amount of project. It was a mammoth project putting together the People's Plan. It's 310 pages, growing because we also include 1-pagers. It's a mammoth of a document that we have spent many, many months, almost a year, really composing. So we hope that during this informational session, you'll be able to get a full overview of what the snapshot is in the People's Plan. We would also like to recognize our additional partner organization, Gender for Equality New York, Long Island Language Advocates Coalition, and New York Social Action Network. These 3 organizations were also a major part of creating the People's Plan. They've added certain sections that include special attention to our LGBTQIA+ demographic, as well as individuals who speak additional languages or multiple languages, as well as social workers who are going to be directly influenced if parts of the People's Plan are actually implemented. So major shout out and much appreciation to these additional organizations who helped participate in composing the final product that is the People's Plan that you'll be seeing today. You'll be hearing from members of each of these 3 organizations as well. So why are we here? You can read the site here. We know that one of the major issues that happened in 2020 was the death of George Floyd, and we're all a comprehensive group. You're here for a reason, and hopefully you're here because you identify and acknowledge that there is a social racial issue as it relates to policing, not only in our nation, but most certainly on Long Island. And I'd like to take a quick moment to share with you a personal story that actually happened to me earlier this afternoon, which I hope you'll be able to empathize with and really acknowledge the importance and the need for the People's Plan. Earlier this afternoon, my mother and I were on a press conference in
Fuck.
which a individual, we just like to ask
Things taken.
if they're put on mute.
Oh.
We had a individual that was on a Black man. He was
Excuse me. Can everyone mute because we can't hear the story?
Thank you. We had, my mother and I were driving in Freeport, and there was a Black man, 45, 50 years old. Something must have happened to him. He was flailing his arms, he fell backwards and hit his head on solid concrete. He started seizing. My mother being training to be a social worker herself, me just being in public service, being aware that this individual obviously needs assistance. We stopped, we pulled the car over. I'm a Village of Freeport resident, and most Freeport residents are very in tune of helping one another. So a few of us stopped our cars, we stopped, diverted traffic from around him and tried to assist him as best as we could. He was choking, he was seizing, and the automatic response is to dial 911. And as a Black woman, I know I need to find a way to get this man assistance. He had hit his head, he was bleeding, he was choking, and I apologize for being graphic, but it was additional amounts of trauma, and I want to make sure to relay how I was feeling to you appropriately. And I dialed 911. Unfortunately, the police that got there, and this is where the People's Plan will really be most effective, is the police are automatically trained to be aggressive. They're trained to deflect issues as best as they can. But in reality, this individual just had a stroke or just had a seizure. There was something clearly not only mentally, but physically wrong. He's flailing about. And the one thing that I recognized that this Black man was recognizing himself was that there's a cop here now. There are a bunch of people who are surrounding me, and I see flashing lights. I don't see an ambulance. Everyone's asking me if I'm okay. I can't articulate that I'm okay or I'm not. I'm freaking out, and the first thing I see is a person with a Black badge, and the officer was holding him down. So the man is already, we've watched him seize, we've watched him have some sort of issue. The first people who came were not an ambulance, they weren't social workers, it was a cop. By him, he was with a partner, but his response was just, hey, listen, I gotta hold you down. But he's got his hand next to his taser and his gun. Like, sir, you need to calm down. I need you to relax. You're not doing well. You're on the ground. And he's not asking him any questions. The officer's not asking any questions. The individual's freaking out more because now he sees a police officer. And when the ambulance finally comes, the ambulance is one person, so he still needs help from the police. And there's still not a social worker to help articulate with this man, what are you feeling? Do you know where you are? Are you okay? What happened? What are you thinking? And the fear for me became, I called 911 twice because I knew I needed someone to get there. And the only way I could get, and in my mind, because I'm doing all of this work, I didn't want the police. I specified, please send an ambulance. That's what this man needs. He needs an ambulance. The police, though, were called and brought first. The fear became, they're being aggressive with someone who I am witnessing, or I witnessed go through a serious dilemma before he could articulate what was wrong. So I wanna remind that the most important part of the People's Plan is the fact that it's more than just training officers differently. It's completely reimagining who should respond first and how to actually help a person in crisis in the middle of a major emergency. Who is best equipped to respond in an instance like that? So, moving right along, I just want all of you to keep that in mind as you hear from our different speakers. But the purpose of the People's Plan, how we all started and got together, was through Executive Order 203, excuse me. And it was the governor's executive order that basically called on all municipalities and governments and police departments to work with their communities, to work with their people in making sure that they are reassessing how they work with the community and how they actually police the communities that they are supposed to be protecting and serving. So all of this, June 12th, 2020, was the issuing of the executive order. And that's immediately when these coalitions started to form and really started to begin their research and groundwork on how we were going to get this mammoth of a project started. So the People's Plan for Police Reform, it's a Long Island community-based, it's community-bred, that this project was written by the people for the people, written by teachers, social workers, nurses, doctors, lawyers, community activists that have been watching our communities suffer for the longest time, trying to make our island safe for everyone, truly safe for everyone. So this the People's Plan is written by not only these six organizations and more, but it's written by people who directly interact with police on various fronts. And that's what makes the People's Plan truly a plan by the people for the people. So for all of you that are still with us, we have some next steps for you. If you have not done so already, please endorse the People's Plan. There's a link here. There will be a link dropped onto the chat. If you have not done so, we encourage you strongly to endorse the People's Plan now. Whether you do it after the session, if you take the time to read it on your own, make sure that the plan gets the support, the visible support that it needs, so that we can continue to show our elected officials, whether it's state, county, local villages, local cities, this plan has the people's support, and it is the only plan that should be considered moving forward. We also want you to help us spread the word about the People's Plan. Talk to your family, your friends, your colleagues, your community leaders about the People's Plan, especially if they're not able to join us for any of the info sessions, or if they're not able to watch any of the recordings of the info sessions. We are building support. We are passing the baton from the researchers that have been a part of these organizations, we are really bringing in the rest of Long Island to help push this forward. And last but not least, we'd like for you to call and email your legislators. I've recognized a few names, so I recognize a few elected officials that are joining us today, and they've also joined us on past informational sessions. But we want you to call and email them further and demand that they adopt the People's Plan. And you can do that through this link here, commoncause.org. So without further ado, these websites will allow you access liunited.org, liafpa.org, two of the main organizations that have a website that you can access the People's Plan on directly. There's also United for Justice and Policing. Their Facebook page also has a link to not only the one-pagers, but the full People's Plan for you to download. And you can access them on Facebook. And I believe that is the last slide before I go on to our one-pagers. Yep, so these are the sections of the People's Plan that you'll be hearing today. They all have one-pagers here. So we will be presenting one-pagers of each of these sections to you. They're bite-sized, so as I mentioned before, you will be able to take the information and those one-pagers to your friends, family, colleague, bosses, and have an in-depth conversation about what parts of these sections most stood out to you in the People's Plan. And now I'm going to get off my soapbox and change the presentation for you all so that we can talk about our first one-pager. These are the new ones. Nope. Where are they? Hold on. technical difficulties. Here we go.
All right, perfect. Well, while you're getting that set up to the beginning one for our crisis response, and then I don't know if there's a way to zoom in, Kiana, just to make it a little bit bigger. You have a chance. But thank you for that intro, Kiana. My name is Emily Kaufman. I am one of the co-chairs of the Transforming Crisis Response Work Group. And what we're going to be doing today, as Kiana just mentioned, is really giving you a high-level overview as we zoom through our 12 research-backed proposals. So I'm going to give about 4 or so minutes, and then if you have questions, you'll put them in the chat, and I'll be able to answer questions in the chat. We'll also be able to take additional questions at the end. So I really appreciate, one, Kiana, I'm sorry that you had to witness that traumatic experience today, and we certainly, I think all are hoping that that gentleman receives the help and care that he needs. So I want to talk about how actually our crisis response proposal might have created a different outcome. And Joan, I did see in the chat you saying, actually this was a medical situation, this is an ambulance. And I'm glad that you're mentioning that because our crisis response proposal accounts for a whole host of public health issues and how we want to respond and where the police are in that scenario. So what happens right now is, as Kiana described, a call comes in, and when there's an emergency, there's really one option and one option only in these kinds of circumstances, and that's to dispatch the police. And sometimes an ambulance can come with them, especially if you are asking specifically for that. But what we are proposing is following on models that we've researched that currently happen throughout the nation. In our proposal, you'll take a look at models in Denver, you'll take a look at models in Austin, in Georgia. Many people are familiar with the one in Cahoots in Oregon. And these are models that have created an expanded dispatch response to ensure that public health crises like this get a more expansive public health response. So what will happen in our proposal is when a call comes in, an assessment will happen in the 911 center. And our first component of our model is training 911 dispatchers with specific call scripts to assess for mental health, substance use, and homelessness crisis needs to determine the level of risk to the individual and to anyone at the scene so we can figure out who the best dispatcher is. So in that determination, we'll determine if there's no emergent need, but we do need some support, and that will be a call diversion to what we call a warm line. If it is assessed that there's no express threat to self, and no threat to someone else, but we do need an emergency response, someone to go to the scene, that would be a scenario where we would dispatch our behavioral health crisis teams. And again, this is modeled off of successful models currently happening around the country today that we want to bring to Nassau and Suffolk County. Our tier 2 assessment would be if that assessment in the 911 call showed an express threat to self, but no weapon was present and no threat to someone else. So that might be suicidal ideation, that might be substance use. This would probably be what the call qualified that Kiana described, and this would be dispatched a behavioral health responder along with a medical team. You'll notice we don't have police in this scenario yet because there's no threat to anyone else around, no weapon present. Though of course, in any of these scenarios, if there is need for police, they can always be called in as backup. And then you'll do see our third tiered response is when there is an express threat to self and other and the presence of a weapon. And here we do need the specialization of our police to be dispatched, but we don't want to send them alone. We want to make sure we send them with behavioral health crisis responders and perhaps also a medic. So you'll see the difference in what we're proposing in this tiered response to make sure that we're treating our behavioral health crisis as the public health crisis they are. So we have 4 components in our proposal, as you can see in the purple box: the changes to the 911 call center, the first responder teams, the criteria-based dispatch response, matching the level of risk to the level of need. And the 4th piece, and you're going to see this all throughout the People's Plan, is the importance of data collection and transparency. It's been incredibly challenging to access 911 data from both Nassau and Suffolk to find out what types of 911 calls come in, how they're screened for, what the dispatch response is. And we really want to see that data as we implement a new model in order to understand how it's working, if people are getting the help they need. I'll end with our benefits. As you can see in the bottom right, This transformed response that we're proposing, which other cities are seeing the benefits of, are as follows. It helps to end the criminalization of mental health, substance use, and homelessness. It creates more supportive, non-traumatic interactions with community members in crisis. Sometimes just the presence of the sirens, the uniform can be triggering and traumatizing to members in crisis. This will help create wraparound linkages to long-term services by getting behavioral health responders right there when the crisis is happening. This is substantially cost savings to our taxpayers. As a social worker, while I wish social workers were paid more, this is a much more inexpensive response. You'll also see in our proposal the different transportation methods. So we don't always have to call an ambulance. We can actually use the behavioral health response vehicles, as is being done in Denver, Austin, and Eugene, Oregon, and many other places. And lastly, it increases our police efficiencies so that police can take the time they need responding to actual criminal matters and not public health matters. So I'll take questions in the chat. Again, our full proposal is 36 pages. You can access it on the websites, as well as these one-pagers. And I am going to turn it over from there to Terrell, who's going to talk about traffic.
All right, thank you, Emily. Hopefully I'm going to try to keep this pretty quick, brief. So just how Emily explained how the People's Plan advocates for a public health solution to public health problems, the People's Plan also advocates for traffic safety solutions for issues regarding what should be traffic safety. And we know that this is a problem. Suffolk County has released data showing that Black drivers are 4 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers. They're 2 times more likely to be searched than white drivers. They're 3 times more likely to be subjected to physical force. And so these disproportional outcomes are clearly unacceptable. And we have to ask ourselves, the county has to ask itself, what is driving those disproportional outcomes? The members of the 3 coalitions have come together. We've looked at this, and what we found was that these disproportional outcomes are primarily being driven by pretextual stops. And a pretextual stop is where an officer utilizes a minor routine traffic infraction as pretext to stop a vehicle and then fish for evidence regarding an unrelated investigation. Now, data from Suffolk County actually found that in searches of Black drivers, they were actually 29% less likely to find contraband, which is drugs or weapons, than white drivers. So clearly there was bias that was occurring in many of these stops and searches. So number one, the People's Plan proposal aims to have the 2 counties join other forward-thinking districts in Maryland, Virginia, Philadelphia, even Texas, by restricting police officers from engaging in pretextual stops and warrantless searches. Additionally, the People's Plan advocates to unarm traffic officers, to put in place unarmed traffic officers in order to regulate traffic. Currently, the traffic enforcement runs contrary to the culture of policing, which has more and more adopted this warrior's mentality that there can be danger around any corner. And armed officers often utilize what is called police authority, such as asking a person to get out of a car or attempting to restrain a driver, which often escalates situations. A big argument for arming traffic drivers is that, well, it's so dangerous for police officers. Yet the reality is that an officer is killed 1 in every 65 million stops. And many times when the officer is injured, it is due to the natural danger of being out of your vehicle while on the side of a road. So oftentimes it's another vehicle accident that causes danger and harm. So therefore, the People's Plan aims to explore innovative options for routine traffic enforcement, such as creating an unarmed traffic officers whose sole duty is to maintain traffic safety. And finally, as Emily mentioned, we can't do anything without having accurate, comprehensive data. And so our final recommendation is that that the 2 counties collect and provide both raw and analyzed data in alignment with the STAT Act. And we're going to talk a little bit later about what the STAT Act is. And now I'm going to turn it over to Fred for the Civilian Complaint Review Board.
Thank you, Terrell. And good afternoon to everybody. Good to see some familiar faces on the screen. The People's Plan has been discussed, is a wonderful work. It is comprehensive, but it is also holistic. You'll see that we use common language throughout, that there are themes that try to, one, decrease the impact of policing where they don't need to be. Two, and probably most important, is to try and make sure that there is community input in processes that affect the community and that also affect the responsibility of policing. Transparency, accountability are very much part of the People's Plan. This next section I'm going to talk about is a section that is the Civilian Complaint Review Board. We have made a fair analysis of what is taking place with regard to civilian complaints that are made against police and how they are handled. And frankly, they are investigated by Internal Affairs. And let me just turn my phone off for a second.
A man with a plan is always in demand.
Hey, thank you. The Internal Affairs bureaus of both police departments, Nassau and Suffolk, and just so you know, many of the smaller police departments do not even have internal affairs departments. They're oftentimes investigated only by one individual. But those bureaus and departments in the police departments don't do a very good job, and in some situations don't do a job at all concerning civilian complaints. There's an issue with regard to where people have to make complaints, that being going back to the very people that they're complaining about, and whether or not police can police themselves has always been a question. And most recently, we have seen that over and over again, where police are found their charges are unsubstantiated against them in situations where there's even video. We see the need for that most recently with regard to Christopher Cruz, just on February 24th. In Suffolk County. So the Civilian Complaint Review Board would be an independent, non-police body with strong investigative ability, well-funded, and would be in cooperation with the police department in terms of information and exchange of information. Data concerning that would be made available, and it would have very important power. One, the power to subpoena and call witnesses in its investigation and hearings, but also it would allow for the evaluation of these complaints if they need to be referred to, for instance, whether or not there's criminal activity that needs to go to the district attorney's office, or if the subject who is in the officer is in some way unapologetic, there can be discipline, or the appropriate discipline can be determined. The holding of hearings is important, but also is the opportunity for restorative justice. The concept of restorative justice allows for mediation to take place. There are many cases where a civilian makes a complaint and the real outcome needs only to be someone on the police side that says, "You're right, ma'am. I did make a mistake. I did that wrong. I used inappropriate language. Please accept my apology. And I've learned my lesson, and I'm going to get some additional training concerning that," and mean it. Many times that may very well satisfy what is necessary. But if not, there is still a composition of a Civilian Complaint Review Board that we have set up, where there'd be 5 individuals appointed by the county legislature, 5 appointed by the county executive, and then there would be a chair who would be appointed by both, who would have the ability to oversee and make sure that the investigations go forward, that they are then determinations are made. And one of the differences with the Civilian Complaint Review Board that we have drafted talks about the discipline being a directive, not an option. In New York City, up until recently, and by the way, we're very flattered that they've taken our language, but most recently, New York City would make a recommendation, their CCRB would make a recommendation, and it could be accepted or ignored by the commissioner. Here, we are suggesting that the commissioner would be directed as to what disciplinary actions need to take place. And if he or she wants to change it, she must then go to the Civilian Complaint Review Board and get a additional ruling with a 2/3 vote of the Civilian Complaint Review Board to change that. That then gives it teeth, that makes it authority, and makes it a meaningful step in trying to involve individuals from the community into the issue of disciplining and overseeing actions of the police with regard to civilian and inappropriate actions. This is a very important factor that changes the police culture, because right now we know that police feel as though if they even get a civilian complaint, there's nothing that they take seriously. How do we know that? Well, in many, many depositions where police are asked, they don't even remember the civilian complaints. They're not very important to them because they are almost 90 or 95% always unsubstantiated, and if not unfounded, and rarely is there any discipline that comes from them. So that's it for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. Let me pass it on to, I assume Deborah's going to handle it.
I'm actually going to take the Inspector General. Oh, is it right to know? Okay, Deb.
Sorry, I was trying to answer Joan's question in the chat. Fred, maybe you want to take a look. I was about halfway through it. Okay, so Right to Know Act. Too often, or in fact, almost all the time, when one gets stopped by an officer, first of all, you're stressed out about the encounter. And second of all, the officers rarely tell you who they are or tell you in a way that you would remember. If you get a ticket, then you have their name. But the Right to Know Act requires that officers identify themselves at the time that they stop your progress, whether pedestrian, bicycle, vehicle. They have to provide their name, their rank, their command, the date of that it is, and the reason for the stop. Quite often, you don't really know why you've been pulled over. They then would be required to complete a checklist detailing all of the information they've provided, to hand you a card with that information on it, and to file the information with the department so that the aggregate data about stops is collected. So that is a core part of the People's Plan. The People's Plan also proposes that there be written consent required anytime a search is conducted of a car, a body, or possessions. And the officer would be required to tell the civilian that they do not have to consent to a search. And third, and I'll come back to this with STAT Act, but the requirement for data. If the police do not collect and publish information about what they are doing, then none of us know, and we pay for them. They are our employees, and we deserve to know. So turning it over to Terrell for Inspector General.
Inspector General. So right now we're talking about a police accountability, and the People's Plan actually proposes the development of what we call an infrastructure of accountability. And the reason why we need an infrastructure of accountability is currently police departments, the two police departments relatively utilize a process that goes through the police departments itself. So it's police policing themselves. And that breaks down, it erodes trust between law enforcement and the community when a police officer is only going to be accountable to another officer, instead of being accountable to an outside independent body and being accountable to what Fred mentioned, a CCRB that's made up of citizens, civilians. So we propose an infrastructure of accountability that ensures that officers engaging in misconduct are held accountable by structures outside of the department, therefore disciplining inappropriate behavior and, importantly, protecting the community's faith in law enforcement. One of these structures is a police inspector general, which would be coded in legislation. This coupled with the CCRB, it would be an independent office, and coupled with the CCRB, the development of the office would ensure that necessary oversight is taking place. A police inspector general would have the power and responsibility to audit, inspect records, policies, and data, as well as the ability to leverage subpoena, investigative, and reporting powers. And the reality is that this type of office is not new. The federal government actually has offices of inspector general that has oversight of their law enforcement departments. And so that's really it. I think I'm turning it back over to Deb.
Yep, Stat Act.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I just said data, data, data. We have a comprehensive, what we call Stat Act proposal in the People's Plan. Right now, NASA and Suffolk both collect and make public pretty minimal parts of amounts of data. And Suffolk County reports the data because they are under a settlement agreement requirement with the U.S. Department of Justice. Once that settlement agreement is completed, if the department ever comes into full compliance, then they will no longer be required to collect this data. So the proposal is that police departments should be required to collect, meaning every officer is reporting on this probably through a mechanized system, to maintain and to publish in raw format so that outside researchers can actually do their own analysis of the data. So to collect it, maintain it, and publish data on all police-civilian interactions, including traffic stops, pedestrian stops, bicycle stops, 911 calls, civilian complaints, hate crimes, language access requests, and police in schools, SROs. In addition, the proposal is that they report to the public about the types of surveillance technologies they are purchasing and using, and about their asset forfeiture process. So they should maintain a comprehensive database. They should publish the raw data from this database quarterly on their website, and then they should have the data analyzed by an independent vendor. And by independent, the recommendation is, the proposal is that they hire a local institution of higher education or a think tank to do the analysis. 2 reasons. First, keep the money local. Second, the best people to analyze data, particularly in such a politically charged environment, as our policing, are people who don't have any stake in the game. And researchers at universities, they are accountable to their peers in the field. So they are accountable for bias, because if their work is biased, it won't be respected. And they are accountable for their methodology. In Suffolk County, we learned that the Finn Institute, which did the assessment of the Suffolk County police data, had both methodological errors and bias errors. So we want to protect against that. And the proposal is to hire local institutions of higher education and to include advocates in the process of choosing that vendor. Finally, the last part, which we will come to in other sections, is there has to be reporting of these studies and oversight by the Public Safety Committee, which is the committee of the legislature that is charged with oversight of the police. And I think that probably takes us to Public Safety Committee. Yes? And I'm moving down my own sheet here, sorry.
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, so I'm going to summarize this one pretty quickly. Basically, legislatures have the authority and should set the standards for police practices, demand ongoing data collection and reporting on those practices, require the commissioner of police to show up twice a year at a public hearing to report after the data have been analyzed about what is actually happening on the ground and what, if any, changes are going to be made in response to evidence of ongoing bias or brutality or some of the other things that we have been concerned about. And also then to, so have these hearings twice a year and allow the public to also question the commissioner at these hearings, because there's a real wall between the public and the commissioner of police. I know that some of the commissioners go out to community meetings, but in terms of accountability for the broad practices, we need to break down that wall. I think that that's all I have to say about that. The next one is complaints. Okay. So Fred talked about that a little bit, right? Our proposal is to basically take complaints away from internal affairs and move them to a CCRB. Some would go to the Inspector General, again, depending on the nature of the complaint. But we recognize that even if both legislatures agreed with that, it can't happen overnight. So in the interim, we want some controls over how the complaints are investigated on the ground. So basically, we propose that department precincts not investigate themselves, period, end of report. A complaint should never be returned back to the precinct of the officer about whom the complaint is offered. So all investigation should happen at the Internal Affairs Unit. All the complaints should be shared immediately with the Public Safety Committee, and communications with the complainant about the complaint as it's being processed should also be shared with the public safety community. That both adds a layer of oversight and asks the Public Safety Committee to frankly do their job of oversight of the police. You move it down a little bit more. Sorry, thank you. Finally, when complaints are resolved, there needs to be public reporting about the resolutions, including explanations of what the bases for not substantiating complaints might be. Currently in Suffolk, last year, there were only 14% of complaints substantiated. The year before that, I believe it was 8%. So basically, IAB is not finding very much misconduct, and that might be right, but we don't know because there's no oversight, there's no transparency, there's no one outside the police department looking at it. So our proposal is that there has to be oversight and that the complaints have to be outside the precincts. Next.
Okay, so I'm going to talk briefly about liability insurance. Over the past 5 years combined for Nassau and Suffolk County, taxpayers had to pay over $50 million in settlements for police misconduct. And I'll repeat that number. In the last 5 years, taxpayers had to pay the bill of over $50 million between Nassau and Suffolk for police misconduct. Personally, as a social worker, I have to carry my own liability insurance. If I harm a client, I am responsible for that harm. I can lose my license, I can lose my job, and I certainly can be made to pay for that. And what we are asking is that for folks who have the greatest power in society, the power to take a life, that they also need to be responsible in how to use that power. So our goal would be, in order to hold police officers accountable, officers who have force histories that are more dangerous would be forced to leave the profession, pay certainly higher rates if they continue to have a track record, a negative track record. On the contrary, where the police department would be paying the base premium, the average premium, if an officer had a very strong record and very low complaints, they would actually get money back. So this encourages good policing, and this makes sure that those who are not practicing good practices are certainly held personally accountable and eventually forced out of the profession. I'll move that to you, Deb.
Thank you. So I want to address the issue of community surveys. Community surveys are required of Suffolk County Police Department by the 2014 settlement agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice. They're finally getting one done now in 2021. So it's been 7 years. So the first part of our proposal is that community surveys have to be a priority. They have to be a part of the department budget, and they have to happen annually. Surveys should measure how satisfied people are with how they're treated by police, how the police handled their problem, civilian judgments about procedural justice that was provided or not during the encounter, and whether or not police offered and provided language assistance. They also need to be sure that surveys are distributed to affected communities. So Latinx communities, African American communities, other BIPOC communities, members of the LGBTQ and gender expansive communities, youth, people who've experienced arrest. And so in order to make sure this all happens, our proposal again is to hire an independent vendor from a local institution of higher education. We have a lot of terrific universities on Long Island, and they're very, very sophisticated and skilled survey researchers at multiple institutions. There's no reason that the police department should be looking outside our local vendors for that. Finally, the data from the surveys need to be published on the police websites in raw form, as well as the analysis by the vendor, so that other researchers can do their own analysis. That is the way that knowledge progresses and is checked. Thank you. What's next? Use of force. Okay, so that would still be me. Okay, so we all know, and in fact, we came into this following a horrific use of force in the murder of George Floyd in Minneapolis, right? Police are given by the state, which is us, given the power to take life. There's no other institution besides the military that is given that power. It is a power that needs to be watched and regulated. So our proposal has several components. First is to define use of force. Use of force is not just using your weapon, right? The Supreme Court has made it very clear that anytime a police officer stops a civilian and deprives them of their liberty, meaning they are not free to go, that is a use of force by the state, because that, no matter how polite that request, it is backed up by the implicit threat of force. Departments need to have a clear policy that tells officers they must resort to, that they should have alternatives and rely on alternatives to weapons and physical force, that they need to de-escalate always, that they need to slow down and take their time. There needs to be an established use of force continuum that explains to officers kind of a series of steps, not that one follows them rote, but that there are different strategies one can use to diffuse and de-escalate a situation without immediately using force. And actually, Kiana's example today is a perfect example, because rather than immediately hold the gentleman down, the police officer should have stepped back and said, "How can I help you? What do you need?" That didn't happen. And they're not trained, right? So Fred will talk about some of the training requirements in the plan. Finally, data. The police have to report on all uses of force, and that does not mean just lethal force. It means any use of force to detain, restrain, contain, arrest an individual, including data about the demographics of the people involved, what type of force was used, whether the civilian responded with force themselves, whether there were injuries. We have a very comprehensive requirement to let the public know how the policing is actually being done. Thank you. Hate crimes. All right, I'll take this one too, sorry. It's been the end of a 6 weeks process and we're not quite as all in the room as we would like to be. So hate crimes. I'll make it simple. Basically, hate crimes are a problem and a growing problem in this country. The New York Times has recently had articles about the growing number of hate crimes against Asian Americans in the wake of the COVID crisis and the irresponsible blaming of that pandemic on the Chinese. We see increasing numbers of stories about crimes against transgendered trans women of color. So hate crimes, the police are the ones to whom hate crimes are reported. They need to correctly classify every time a complaint is given to them about this, whether it be an officially designated hate crime under state law, a hate incident, or what's called a non-designated hate crime. Too often, for example, the police will take the writing of swastikas on public property as graffiti. Graffiti's not a crime, or it's a misdemeanor. They should be classifying it as criminal mischief, which is a hate crime under state law. So they're underreporting the incidence of hate crime. And so first they need to classify and categorize correctly. And second, we need to have updated public maps showing us as a community where hate crimes and incidents are occurring. Because the truth is, it takes all of us to come together as a community to say, not in our town, this will not stand. But we can't do that without the information and correct information from the police. Finally, all police officers need to have annual training in hate crimes, incidents, policy, law, and frankly, trends in hate crimes in this country. And so outside consultants who are specialists in hate crimes should be brought in to do this training and retraining. And now I turn it over to Julie. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Gray Owens, Executive Director of Gender Equality New York, a nonprofit that advocates for gender expansive people, and that includes transgender, gender non-binary, and intersex New Yorkers. I'm also a member of the Nassau County Jail Advocates, and I've been training transgender cultural competency to the recruits at the Nassau County Police Academy since 2017. The gender expansive community consists of people whose personal identity doesn't match the sex and gender assigned to them at birth. It includes a wide range of identities and experiences outside of society's gender expectations. However, most law enforcement officers are cisgender, meaning the designation that was given to them at birth matches completely with their internal gender identity. As with most members of the general public, they believe that sex categories are binary, fixed, and easily identifiable at birth. Unfortunately, these beliefs leads to transphobia, the mix of cultural and personal beliefs that produces hostility, fear, discomfort, and distrust. These personal feelings can transform into severe actions that are directed towards those who don't conform to society's gender expectations. In a national transgender survey, more than half of the respondents said they were either somewhat or very uncomfortable asking for police to help. 58% of those who interacted with police or law enforcement officers reported some form of mistreatment, such as being referred to as the wrong gender, verbally harassed, or physically or sexually assaulted. Nearly 1/3 of the respondents who were incarcerated were physically and or sexually assaulted by facility staff and or another inmate. The most important issue when dealing with gender expansive people is providing respectful and equal treatment. This means treating individuals in a manner appropriate to the person's gender identity or gender expression, as well as treating gender expansive individuals in the same way you would any cisgender person. So we're looking for a policy that will provide safe and equal and affirming relationships. And in the People's Plan, there are 38 different policy recommendations that will make it a lot easier for law enforcement officers to deal with our community and in much more affirming and successful relationships. We are looking specifically at policies that provide clear professional directions regarding appropriate behavior while interacting with gender expansive community members, and the consequences of failing to comply with anti-discrimination policies that include gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. The guidelines should also specify the use of the individual's chosen name and pronouns, as well as procedures that specifically focus on respectful search and frisk, transporting of individuals, housing placement, restroom use, removal of appearance-related items, use of segregated cells in solitary confinement, allowing arrestees to retain or take prescription items while in custody, including prescription hormones, and providing medical attention with the same urgency and respect as given cisgender people. The policy should also include regularly cultural sensitivity training on transgender, intersex, and gender non-binary issues for all staff, including new recruits, staff members of the department, supervisors, and commanders. And there should be clear procedures for community members to be able to report discrimination or disrespectful treatment. There should be anonymous tracking of all complaints concerning the quality of police services on the basis of gender identity, gender expression, and/or sexual orientation, and making this data publicly available and accessible. And finally, there needs to be a commitment to recruit and hire gender expansive people. There's an urgent need to create safe and affirming relationships between gender expansive Long Islanders and law enforcement officers. Professionalism and sensitivity can create an environment of respect and trust, and officers who are supportive of gender expansive people will increase lines of communication, which may be helpful in solving or preventing crime. Departments and staff that are willing to create fair and thoughtful policies will create a community where all citizens feel safe and trust their law enforcement officers, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expression. Thank you.
Okay, is Joan on for SROs?
I am here. Yes, thank you.
All right, yep.
Okay. My name is Joan Skelly. I'm with United for Justice in Policing Long Island, and I am a retired school administrator. And I am speaking about the section of the People's Plan that talks about eliminating the school resource officer program. The People's Plan addresses the documented harm posed to students when police are assigned to patrol a school building and outlines more effective alternatives to supporting students' social, emotional, educational, and health needs. While there are some differences in the context of police and schools in Nassau, SROs remain a concern in both counties. Nassau County Police Commissioner Patrick Ryder repeatedly stated that the department cannot afford an SRO program. But he also states in his new police reform proposal, the Nassau County Homeland Security Unit and problem-oriented policing officers work closely with all 56 school districts, particularly involving matters of student discipline. The department does not release data and information on police and schools, so the public does not know where the SROs are working. According to advocates and educators, the Westbury, Hempstead, Uniondale, and Roosevelt school districts may have direct ties to Nassau Police and the Freeport School District with the Freeport Police Department. The SRO program is documented to exist in Suffolk County. There are few public details, but parents and advocates have learned about SROs assigned full-time to schools in the South Country, Patchogue Medford, South Manor, Central Islip, and Brentwood school districts. The People's Plan addresses the state requirement of a memorandum of understanding between police and school district, specific to police involvement in each school, as well as data collection and reporting on student SRO interaction. Remember, a school resource officer is employed, supervised by, and reports to the police department, not the school district. Two of the most harmful results of school policing are the school to prison pipeline and the school to deportation pipeline. In each case, school discipline or inappropriate profiling by school police propels students into the criminal law or immigration systems. This is especially true for children of color, immigrant students, and other marginalized young people. Research on the national level and examples at the local level clearly point to the harm done to students. The Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, known as FERPA, protects educational records and student information. SROs observing students and conversing with them in school has the potential to violate the student's right to privacy. There is no data on SRO and student contact, at least shared publicly, which complicates monitoring and enforcement of FERPA. Whether the SRO is chatting with or questioning a student, there are opportunities, intentional or not, to bypass FERPA protections. When school discipline and law enforcement become intertwined, students suffer. In spite of the documented harm to students, SRO programs exist ostensibly for school safety and mentoring students. There is no evidence that the presence of an SRO increases school safety, but many examples of where it has not. There is no documented evidence of positive outcomes for Suffolk County students who are in contact with an SRO in school, except carefully curated anecdotes and presentations put forward by Police Commissioner Hart. Student support is best provided by health professionals, peer programs, or school staff. Existing mentoring and peer-to-peer programs already serve this important function in many schools and can be easily replicated. Increasing the number of school counselors, psychologists, and social workers is a more effective way to support students. Funds can be secured through grants, county, state, and federal resources. Redirecting funds from unnecessary and unproven law enforcement initiatives is not defunding the police. Targeting resources to the most effective systems is the smart and fiscally responsible way to support students. The problem of insufficient data and reporting is addressed in the People's Plan in the Police Statistics and Transparency Act on pages 151 and 152, and also in the SRO section under specific recommendations on page 213. At the most basic level, data is essential to determine the efficacy of the SRO program. The People's Plan recommends that for the safety and well-being of students, the SRO program be eliminated. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Joan. And I think Karen, we are, Kiana, if you go to language access.
Hi, everyone. Yes, thank you. So I'm going to present the one pager that we have for language access. So at the heart of the matter is the idea that language access saves lives, and it is a right. And so two of the aspects about the language access plan is pushing for a cultural shift. Both counties have a language access plan. We strongly feel that they can do better. They can do better in their attempts to provide an efficient and deliberate way to communicate with the populations that are limited in English proficiency. One of the things that we know is that language access is oftentimes denied because of biases that exist when officers communicate with individuals. And we want to prevent that. We want to reduce that. We want folks to understand that asking someone to learn to speak English is just as hard as having someone who already speaks English to learn another language. What we want to do is incentivize officers so they do learn other languages. The current plan uses Language Line as a way to communicate with the limited English proficient populations, and we want to push for more recruiting and more training of bilingual officers. The other part of the plan is to track the technology that is currently used. As I spoke earlier about, Language Line is oftentimes used to communicate when the officer does not know the other language, but we want to track that. We want to have officers who are strategically placed in precincts where they know what the common languages are in those precincts. The other aspect of the plan is to develop trust. What we feel that our plan does is allow our community to develop the tools to demand better services. If they don't get the services, to feel that they can trust the system to create a complaint process, to have language coordinators that know another language, to stop relying on children or other bystanders as interpreters. We want greater accountability. We especially feel that it is very important, you'll see in the one pager here, that we also highlight ways in which each of the county's police departments can do better and improve what they currently have in terms of language access plan. So again, I am happy to take more questions, but because of time, this is all I can say for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And is Terrell back? Oh no, we're going over actually to Fred.
We
Sorry,
are.
Kiana, you need to switch to the other ones.
Actually, we're going to go right now to building authentic trust and legitimacy.
Yep.
And let me just start by just saying, for those of you who have been, and our numbers have grown since we started, but we have already gone through and we are at page 256 of this document in terms of just giving you the thumbnail sketch of it. And it is, of course, I know you've seen the cover, but we've now covered a large part of this, and again, not in depth, but giving you highlights and overviews. We encourage you all to take a close look at it, but just so you know that we're well on the way to completing, and so we can get to some more questions and input that you may have as we go through the process. This next section is one that talks about building authentic trust and legitimacy within the communities. And this is a very important area, but that's something we've been talking about all along. We've been talking about that throughout this discussion about the People's Plan, and that is to try and create and implement community-centered policing practices and policies that will allow the police to be engaged with the community and the community to be engaged with the police, so that there is greater community input and control, and where necessary to limit the footprint of policing within the community, and also to identify what the needs are of the community. Eliminating such programs as previously identified historically as broken windows program, which promote least harm strategies, encouraging issuing warnings and citations, and formally resolving minor infractions, and not turning everything basically into criminal activity for the purposes of, one, pumping up police numbers for purposes of promotion, and two, increasing policing in communities of color who are oftentimes over-policed and overemphasized in both of the counties. In the communities of colors, we see that not only with regard to the traffic stops, but also with regard to arrest. You'll see, and we talk about this in the technology section, but in Nassau County, the number of arrests, black to white, are 5.3 to 1. Let me repeat that. 5.3 to 1, every African Americans are arrested for every one white person. And statistically, that just doesn't make sense when you have the African American community, and the Hispanic community is more than double, being far less than the majority, 9 or 10% of the community. So the question has to be, how is that addressed? How is the community involved in transforming the culture of policing, and dealing with that overall is what we're talking about in terms of building this level of trust and relationship. I urge you to take a look at that because it does provide a roadmap for policing in the 21st century. Talking about the 21st century, we go immediately to technology and social media. In the technology and social media section, we talk about data collection. And again, Deb has said it, Terrell has said it, and I'll say it again. Data collection is important. Why? Because then we are dealing with facts. We are dealing with evidence-based determinations and evaluations. And here, you'll see side by side 2 sections. The first one is technology and social media. One, that there be platforms that are created so the community has the ability not only to see what's going on, but to interact with its police department concerning suggestions, concerning concerns, concerning what is needed in terms of perhaps information for the community. Social media and telling the story of the community and looking at what's going on. How is, for instance, one section of the community being treated differently than the other? And if so, why is that happening? And pointing that out and being able to see that in real time on a monthly and quarterly basis, along with the responsibility of the police commissioner and police brass of speaking to the community on a regular basis, not just in person, but online. Evaluating and detecting racial disparities in those numbers, and again, data collection, and act proactively and become forward thinking and making data available to the public. There's no reason why we should be so far behind in technology in Nassau and Suffolk County when it's very, very easy when data is collected. And in Nassau, we know that they are behind Suffolk, but when data is collected, not only that it is collected, but then it is evaluated and the evaluation is provided to the public. One such example is the traffic stop data that was not evaluated properly at first in Suffolk. And when it was astounding to show that what they said was taking place was not taking place. Things had not changed and the culture of policing had not changed. Changing the culture of police, we go to police hiring. And we talk about the implementing of hiring practices that increase diversity and accountability. One of the things that we know here is that the efforts by both Nassau and Suffolk County have not done well in terms of having persons of color become police officers. And that is for several reasons. And we point those out with regard to the People's Plan, but also suggest ways of addressing that. One of the good things was that we had, as part of one of our drafters in this section, the former head of training for the city of New York, who's now retired. And he was able to talk to us about how you build mentoring programs in and how you provide those communities that might not otherwise have access to prior police service information about how and in what ways that's important. Training is also included. And I answered one of the questions in the chat about training, but there's a whole section that talks about training on different levels, such as training for individuals that are coming onto the force, training for individuals that are already on the force. When there is field training, how is that conducted? And is there a consistent curriculum which is done so that they're not getting trained on the old boy or the old girls network, but they're being trained with regard to consistently, how do you address things so that there is consistency for policing and they're just not learning old tricks that have allowed policing to be a culture that has been both secret and separated from the communities that they serve. The training that we also talk about also deals with how do you train such that there is a level of information available to police so that they can communicate with the communities that they do serve. One clear example that I use and talk about is the need for understanding cultural differences past superficial training. That being, for instance, we've heard over and over again the term Black Lives Matter. And we've also heard police use in response to that, and many people in the community response to that, saying Blue Lives Matter. Well, the reality is that is really not a term, Black Lives Matter, that's asking for debate. It's a statement, historical significance that needs to be reckoned with, that in our nation and in our cultures, that the life of African Americans, based on all the names that we know, including George Floyd, have been devalued. But if you were to ask a police recruit or even a current police officer today, can you tell us what the Article 2 of the Constitution of the United States talked about when it talked about 3/5 a person? Who were they? And what was that about? They couldn't tell you. Or if you asked them what was the 3/5 compromise entered into by the Congress of the United States that was then made part of our culture, that was part of an economic and a political deal, that African Americans were counted for purposes of redistricting 3/5 a person. They were not considered full human beings. And as a result of that, that then fueled in a lot of different ways policing and culture. We talk about the need for in training and education, training individuals about how police came about in the United States, and that in many quarters in the United States, yes, and someone just wrote in the Mississippi Compromise. Indeed, there's a lot of history that needs to take place. Many Americans have no idea. And if many Americans have no idea, you better believe that the police that are policing communities have less of an idea. And that's not a slight, that's just a statement. One of the things we also need to talk about is education. And how do we increase education for individuals so that they are more enlightened individuals when we give them guns, when we give them badges and go into communities, and they are not fully equipped to handle many of the issues, no less have very little life experience in a lot of different ways, particularly with regard to communities of color. And why is that important? Well, the Governor's Executive Order 203 requires that. It requires us to take a deep dive and a look into those things that will help to change police culture and help to change how policing takes place in Suffolk County, in Nassau County, and in America, for the purposes of trying to bring us to a point of equity that will allow communities to be treated appropriately and properly with regard to policing. And so that policing is not a us versus them concept, and that the communities of color that have been over-policed and mistreated for centuries are not continued to be the subject of police misconduct. With regard to that, I just want to, before I end up, I want to be able to just take you through the concept of officer wellness, because our plan is not one which is anti-police. I want to be very clear about that. We agree that police have a very tough job. We agree that policing is in our society. And as a result of that, one of the things we do want to make sure is that not only are the communities cared for, but the people who are supposed to be caring for the communities, that they are cared for as well. So we have an entire section that deals with officer wellness and safety, and looking at some of the factors that make policing not only a tough job, but a tough life to live. And how do we make that better? Well, one way is to make sure that they have all that they need to be and deal with self-care. That being regular check-ins with a mental health provider, not based when they want it, but on a regular basis, that they be able to have and be evaluated on a regular basis for the purposes of their mental status. And here's why. 3 years or 2 years into a job, such as a police officer, you see a lot of things. Going into it, you get one psychological evaluation before you hit the academy. But after that, there is nothing which is required for mental health evaluation. There's nothing which is required about mental health support. There's nothing which is required about mental health check-ins. We suggest that there be a evaluation done on a regular basis so that if a police officer has indications that he or she is not able to do that job, that we get them not only the help, but we also get them the support that's needed to keep them from being problems for themselves, their families, and the community. That's smart, because we are not just caring for automatons. We're not dealing with people who are just numbers, who just put on a uniform and go out and expect them not to be injured in some way based on their psychological support that's needed. And when we do that, we recognize that they are important parts of the community who require and should be provided the information and the support that will allow them to be whole and live good whole lives, and allow their colleagues that when they see a problem, that they won't think that there's such a bad rap on being able to step up and say, hey, John, police officer, is a problem to himself. He's muttering, or he's having problems, or I've been seeing him drink on the job, and as a result of that, we need to talk about that. Right now, the community of policing has such a secretive aspect to it, and a level of denial, that far too often we see such a high level of suicide, alcoholism, and drug abuse, as well as domestic abuse among police officers. And that is one of the reasons why we say there needs to be officer wellness and safety, not only for the community, but for the officers. So let me pass it on, but we ask you to take a look at the People's Plan and ask us any questions that you'd like.
And so we have one more final proposal, and that is the development, the codifying and implementation of a permanent equity and safety task force, which would live under the Public Safety Committee. And we added this to the People's Plan because we understand that, you know, a plan is going to be going to the governor for Executive Order 203. So on April 1st, both counties will be sending a plan, as well as many other districts, to New York State. However, our work and the work of innovating within the space of public safety goes well beyond April 1st. And so therefore, it is necessary that there is a body that is positioned within the government that is able to look at the data and propose new initiatives to pilot in order to ensure that Long Island is safe for all of its community members. The task force would research how to make Long Island safe, utilizing an equity-focused continuous improvement framework. And the responsibilities would include reviewing data on key safety indicators, soliciting community feedback and dialogue, identifying best practices, and investing in communities, promoting equity and ensuring safety. And as I mentioned, publicly proposing new initiatives to pilot and implement, as well as assessing the impact of those initiatives. We recognize that it is very hard for the police department, but truly any institution, to be constantly innovating and looking at themselves reflectively in order to say, how can we do this work better? And so this is why we proposed or commissioned the Equity and Safety Task Force to explicitly look at that data, look at that work, and to live under the Public Safety Committee so that they could present this directly, their recommendations directly to the legislature.
Okay, so that wraps up the overview of the 12 proposals. Kiana, you're going back to the slides. I think as folks continue writing questions in the chat, Kiana was going to go over some next steps and ways that you can get involved, and then we'll answer additional questions.
And
Yes,
Emily,
thank you.
Kiana, before you start, may I just state one thing, please?
Sure.
Yeah, I just want to let folks know that while this is the last section, and I know you're going to talk about the last session, there are a lot of things that are happening in both Suffolk and Nassau right now that have moved the as they say, kick the can down the road a little bit. And as a result of that, where we started doing these sessions, there had been not a lot of action. We didn't have a plan from Suffolk County. And we're seeing that the People's Plan has been a large influence, if not in the discussion, but also in the adoption of a number of portions. We're not completely happy at this point where we are, but that's why we're continuing to do this. So as Kiana takes over, I just want to let people know that you are on this call in a crucial time in how policing will be decided as we start to address what the county executives of both Suffolk and Nassau will place up for a vote, which may very well be a vote up or a vote down by both counties. So let me pass it on to Kiana, but Kiana, I just want to just throw that in because the sequence and prism by which we're dealing with this has changed somewhat.
Yes, Fred, I agree. Thank you very much. I wanted to just thank all of our speakers. Thank every one of you. Most of our speakers were a large leader in a lot of the research that went to their specific section that they spoke about. So I want to say thank you to all of our speakers, and I want to thank all of our participants. You know, both those of you that are here with us on Zoom, and those of you that are on Facebook, watching us on Facebook Live. So here's what's next. Here's what's happening. Now that you've seen this presentation, here's how you and your organization or your company, your business can get involved. Endorse the plan. You've gotten a full overview, even though it was a snapshot, even though we did it in actually record time. So kudos to us, y'all. You've got a full presentation of the People's Plan, what's most important, and even you previewed the additional new one-pagers that we'll be adding. So we need you, as I said in the beginning, to endorse the People's Plan. A link will be provided to you all in the chat, but it's also here at www.liunited.org. It is also available on all of those other organizing coalitions such as LI Advocates for Police Accountability and United for Justice in Policing. Every major coalition has the People's Plan on their document, on their website, their Facebook. So please find it, endorse it, and talk about it. We have here, write a letter to the editor of your local papers. We know that Newsday has covered this article largely, as well as I know we have a reporter joining us today from New York One, but we also have the Heralds. You've got News 12. They've been covering the People's Plan. We want to continue that coverage by asking those of you who are joining us to write a letter to them saying that you came to our informational session and you believe in the progress and the power of the People's Plan. Please, if you have social media or if you have kids that have social media, continue to share the People's Plan on all of your social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. If you have a TikTok and there's a cool way to, shrink the People's Plan one pages and put it on TikTok, please do so. If you don't know what I'm talking about, don't worry about it. And also, last but not least, talk to your friends and family, educate them. And most importantly, please call and email your legislators, your village elected officials, your local elected officials, and demand that they endorse and adopt the People's Plan. I know that there were a few questions in the chat that asked about the other municipalities and localities and how the People's Plan affects them. I believe Fred or Emily answered that question, and essentially they can adopt the People's Plan. They can adopt this document and incorporate it into whatever reforms that they are considering. My village of Freeport has not, but it's a work in progress everywhere. So that is an option. And I believe Emily is going to be speaking about the next slide.
Can I just interrupt real quick? For Suffolk especially, it's more important at this point to write the county executive, because it is the county executive who has the power to make amendments to the plan that he has put forward. So yes, tell your legislators you support the People's Plan, but demand that the county executive bring the People's Plan into his plan.
So Deb, that is a perfect segue. What Kiana is showing you on the screen right now is from the LI United website, where you can send an auto-generated email. We are really trying to make this remove any barriers possible for those who have not been involved in advocacy and activism. We want you to get involved, and there's no more important issue than the issue of police reform, public safety, and addressing racial disparities on Long Island. So you can see that that link, act.liunited.org/email, and we will be emailing out a copy of today's presentation to you by this evening, as well as all of the links for everything. So don't feel pressure to write them down. But if you go to that link, or if you go to the Ally United website, you will be able to pull up a function to send an email directly to your county executive and legislator. So as you can see on the top, you just fill in your name, first name, last name, put in your address, and as soon as you press enter on putting in your address, it'll automatically pull up who your county executive and legislator is. You're going to see there's an auto-generated email. You're welcome to edit the email, change the email, but we already wrote one for you that talk about the racial disparities on Long Island and why it's so important to adopt the People's Plan. And then you go ahead and press send, and it'll go ahead and send it right for you. So we are trying to remove all the barriers possible. Please, 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 they need to hear from the people. And then Kiana, there's one more slide just so that you can hear about some upcoming important dates. Tomorrow, Monday, we are having a press conference in front of County Executive Ballone's office here in Suffolk. It's going to be a press conference where folks from the coalitions are going to do a brief reaction to the Suffolk County draft report, where we see the gaps and what we are urging them to continue to reform in order to adopt more of the proposals from the People's Plan. That's also going to be what we're naming our signs of support for the People's Plan event. Organizations will be coming with their banners so that we can show publicly the over 70 organizations who already in only the past 20 days have fully endorsed the People's Plan. So you're welcome to join us there, or we'll certainly be live streaming it. Also tomorrow at 1 p.m., the Nassau County Public Safety Committee is going to be taking a look at their draft plan and voting on it. They're not open to the public right now. The only way to offer public comment is through email. So I will be sending out the email. Sorry, I didn't finish it in the slide, where you can send your public comments, and we'll also try and get you a sample script if you want to send comments there. And then Tuesday and Thursday, there will be legislative hearings in Suffolk County, the full legislature on Tuesday, that's at 2 p.m. Thursdays at 6 p.m. with the Public Safety Committee. If you've never made public comment before, you have an opportunity for 3 minutes to address the members of the legislature, urge them to urge the county executive to continue to make changes to their plan to adopt more of our proposals. So just wanted to let you know that after getting all of this information, you can turn around and do something already immediately to start acting and advocating for it.
So I do want to just make a slight correction for Nassau. Tomorrow, the hearing is at 2 o'clock, not 1. No, no worries. We just got that clarification. So I do want to make that clear for everyone. If you are able to join us, please be advised that that's at 2. Granted, you might want to arrive there at 1 so that you can get in.
I don't believe it's open to the public unless they change. No, it's
Okay.
just email.
So then if you can watch on the Nassau County website, so you can start doing that, get it set up, then at 1 o'clock, but be prepared, it will start at 2. All righty.
And I just got a quick text. There we go. This last piece, and I was trying to get the graphic up while we were finishing the presentation. I didn't make that happen. But please mark your calendar. March 20th, we are having a caravan. We are going to ride for the People's Plan. If you had to sit through all of those Trump caravans this summer or recently, it is time to bring back a caravan for Black Lives, a caravan against police brutality, to truly rise up and continue to show that we are not leaving. No matter what gets passed in these plans, we have a lot of work to do. So please join us. And again, all this information will be sent out to you. And now I think we can go to the rest of the questions, Kiana.
Awesome. So I do believe that a good majority of questions has been answered in the chat, but I'm just going to pull up my participant screen. I'm just going to do a scroll. I really do believe that if you have any additional questions, please add them to the chat now, and we will direct them to the appropriate speaker. So I know that one of the Sarahs had asked a specific question about what happens if the suggestions from CCRB are not adhered to. I believe that was answered, but because I missed it, I imagine other people might have missed it. So can we clarify what repercussions will happen if we create the CCRB, they provide recommendations, and those recommendations are not adhered to? Essentially, how is the CCRB further enforced?
Well, maybe I can start to address that since I was a section that I worked on, and I just want to thank members of all the organizations that have engaged in trying to put all this together. We have been, and I would just say that this has been an amazing, and I think Kiana, you said it was mammoth, but let me just say it's more than mammoth. It is amazing for so many groups to be able to get together and put together a plan that is so impressive. And I'm saying that even though I'm a part of it, that's so impressive, that shows what the community can do when we want to do it with all the wonderful expertise that we have. So the answer to the question is, it's very possible that a CCRB will not be adopted by Suffolk or Nassau. That does not end the question, because the community has made it very clear that the police cannot police themselves. We know that you don't put a fox in charge of the hen house and expect to have eggs in the morning. And in this situation, the reality is that we're going to have to make it happen. One of the things that we're going to say, and I'll say this now, and I'm going to be, how about this? Let's be prophetic. Is that we may have to put this on as a ballot initiative, and we may have to go from community to community and from door to door to say that police cannot be left to discipline and investigate themselves. Because when you have that, you build corruption and you build the ability to hide the ball. Anybody that's seen the shell game on any street with the 3 shells, we know that there's different ways to manipulate things. And in this situation, if we take that out of the hands of the police and put it into hands of people that don't have anything to gain one way or the other, but just seeking justice and truth, which is really what we're after, and that police be appropriately dealt with as other members of communities that have other jobs, that is what needs to happen. So if indeed, and I see a former Suffolk County legislator on now town of Babylon elected official on, but one of the things we may have to do is, again, join our forces, take our 60 or 70 groups with our 8,500 10,000 people and go out, get the signatures, put it on the ballot, and then make sure our neighbors know that change is coming.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Fred, for that great answer. It's very comprehensive, and I appreciate that because it's not the first time that we've had it. And I do want to I want to reiterate one of the most important aspects of the People's Plan that you heard throughout each section was the collection of data, where the majority of the People's Plan really does require comprehensive data collection and a presentation. And clearly we're asking for that because it's not being done. It's not being done, and if it is being done, it's not being done adequately. So one of the most important ways that we can continue to push this reform is by making sure that, we have the information and the resources that we need to make sure that these plans are going to work and that they're working now. Let's see, another question that I saw here was, a question about has there been talk about less police instead of just reforming the police? That comes from Peter.
I could take a stab at that. I did respond to that question in the chat, but I could take a stab quickly. So while the People's Plan doesn't explicitly ask to decrease the police force and say just decrease the number of cops, what it does do is it tries to focus the work that police officers are in and create police efficiencies. And so what does that mean? It does explicitly mean that we're asking to not have police officers responding as first responders to mental health crises, homelessness, and substance abuse. It explicitly means that we want to explore the ability to have a civilian traffic force, or at the very least unarmed traffic force, because a civilian traffic force might take changes in state law. It explicitly means that police officers should be removed from schools, and that we should not have police officers disciplining our engaging in school discipline with our students, right? So there isn't a specific call for saying decrease the number of police officers. There is an explicit call on increasing police efficiencies, focusing on the work, and ensuring that police work work in the realms that the community want them to work in, and not expand so much into the realms that they are not suited for.
And to add, as Fred just put, we use the language a lot, as we've got from the Center of Policing Equity, which is reducing the police footprint. So we really want to reduce the police footprint, increase police efficiencies, and ensure we have the right people working in the right public safety realm, because as we know, public safety involves much more than just policing. So in this reimagining, we are working to ensure we are reimagining our entire public safety infrastructure, of which policing is a very important part, but it is only one part.
And Emily and Terrell and Kiana, one of the most exciting things about the People's Plan is that folks that wrote this know what the heck they're talking about. We have social workers, we have people that are engaged in police work on both sides. Yeah, do I sue police? Yes, I do. But the reality is also that we had police officers and former police officers help write this and say, let me tell you what the real deal is and how this needs to change. I know when an apple is rotten in the core. It may not be all the apples, but if the apple needs to be dealt with, we need to change it. You can't make good pie from bad apples. Everybody knows that. And what we really need to do is be able to, how do we cook a pie together so that we get the best product that we can do? And that's what the People's Plan is. It basically is a good recipe based on good ingredients coming from all the sources that need to contribute to it.
I want to add to that there have been police officers contributing to the work of UJP, particularly around the kind of data that needs to be made publicly available so that we can all know what the trends are, what the aggregate work of the police department is. And they are the ones who said, if you don't have the data, you can't fix the problems. You just can't. So we have been very well informed by officers who are committed to having police officers truly do good, unbiased work for the community.
And so I saw a question. I'm sorry, did you want to go, Fred?
Yes, just because we have like 15 minutes left and there are two actually really important questions that we didn't get to address. So I want to add those in. Mabalaji had asked, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. He wanted to know what the outreach is, what outreach is being made to communities outside of the Spanish-speaking population, and if what that outreach is going to look like. I do want to definitely acknowledge that the Spanish language access is not the only language on Long Island. We do recognize that. However, we do have limitations in who can help us translate documents. So I would love to have Karen or Emily answer that more if possible.
So I can definitely take a stab as far as we are working on a Spanish speaking info session, which is going to be Tuesday, the 23rd, and working with interpreters. And as we speak, we're getting our one-pagers that you've seen this whole time translated into Spanish. Has taken a little bit of time, and we do want to make sure that we're paying people for their translation work. While everything that has been done in the People's Plan has been done voluntarily, and that is such the beauty of this community-led effort. Everyone who has been involved, and it has been hundreds of people, have done this on their own, but certainly we know that Spanish and language translators in all languages often get taken advantage for their time and their specialized skills. So we're working on that in Spanish. We're hopefully going to have them by the 23rd as well. We're then going to be working on them in Haitian Creole. We will be working over the next year or so to have the full 310-page document translated in both Spanish and Haitian Creole. But again, it is taking us a little bit of time. So we're very conscious of that. And with regard to outreach to communities, everyone who is a part of this coalition, if you've seen any of our videos that have been going around, one of them ends with this beautiful quote that says, "This is our plan. This is your plan. This is the people's plan." And what has been truly amazing about this endeavor is that everyone who has grabbed onto the proposals in this plan has been reaching out to whoever they know and getting meetings with folks, different organizations, churches, nonprofits, community organizations. And so this is now your plan too, to go and continue to educate people in all communities about it. So we have very active outreach efforts, and we already have 70 organizations in just the last less than 30 days who have already endorsed the full plan.
So I will add to Emily's statement of lift up the fact that a lot of us are volunteering our time and resources and commitment. So as it relates to making this plan as accessible as possible, we absolutely want to do that. But you are here, and if we are dropping the ball, we welcome you to pick it up and run with it. Score for us, yay. One of the other questions that I saw was from a Sarah Cohen. She asked, is there evidence that it is safe to only have social workers respond rather than have an officer nearby as well? To clarify, I don't believe that the People's Plan Act specifically articulates to only have a social worker attend, but I'm going to definitely pass this off to Emily to respond.
Sure, so I'll make this one quick. What is beautiful about the People's Plan is every proposal is backed with evidence. So please check out the full proposal. The Transforming Crisis Response, as I said, is 36 pages. It's a research paper. We have our one-pager to make it more digestible. It footnotes all of our research, and all of the data is coming from models currently happening around the nation. So where it is the specific calls, where there is a weapon, as I described, where you would need a police officer's presence there, absolutely, that's in our Tier 3 response. But we are seeing evidence around the nation that there are calls for service for public health emergencies that require only a public health response. And in fact, having the presence of police, even off to the side, can actually traumatize and escalate a situation and be harmful. So we're not making anything up. We are going from things existing, that's in the Transforming Crisis Response section, all the way through the plan. The traffic enforcement section, and Terrell could speak, takes a look at data and proposals and models that are popping up around the nation as well.
Emily, just quickly, can you name off a few cities that have already implemented this
Sure.
model without police
So
officers?
Yeah, and I want to also be clear, as I've said many times, we're not only reading about these models, we're in contact. So I was emailing with Austin, Texas, and the head of their integral health program that has their MCOP model, which is their emergency mobile crisis outreach team. And they work collaboratively with the 911 dispatch center. Everything in our model is drawn from what's happening in Austin. The pilot that started 6 months ago in Denver has already increased 5-fold in funding due to the results they have had. And taxpayers, police, community members are all seeing the benefit. And we see this across all the proposals for every department that's willing to make these changes. And we need to push on Nassau and Suffolk to become 2 of the next ones.
Thank you. So with 10 minutes left, do we want to show the video? I have one more question that I do want us to address, but I want to be cognizant of time.
Sure. I saw one question from Dwayne Gregory, and you want me to just respond to that very quickly?
I was going to offer it to you and Deborah, because Deborah we've heard her all presentation, so I know she wants to give her voice a break, but
Sure.
I wanted to offer the both of you the opportunity to answer that.
Sure. Deborah, go ahead, please.
I was going to say you start.
Okay, not a problem. Dwayne, the answer to the question is somewhat. We did not deal directly with corruption. We did deal with the Inspector General and the concept of both integrity and transparency. But we now know that there are real questions with regard to the issues of corruption. We saw that with regard to the arrest of Mr. Spota and Mr. Burke and their convictions. We see that now with regard to internal investigations that are ongoing and that I know, and I think that you know, are ongoing currently. I don't want to talk about them because I don't have all the information, but we talk about that peripherally. One of the things that we would anticipate that with the advent of taking things out of the hand of internal affairs, that then there would be transparency to allow for the public to view things and disincentive for the level of corruption and abuse that has consistently plagued and unfortunately has been focused on Suffolk. But the reality is that we know that close quarters and family slap on the backs allow for a lot of stuff that would not normally happen where there should be a professional relationship. Deb?
Yeah, this is very, as you know, Dwayne, this is incredibly complicated in Suffolk particularly. I will share with you a couple of things. UJP discovered that Suffolk had intentionally put up duplicate data on their website of traffic stops. The duplicates worked to basically lessen the reported disparities between whites and blacks and Latinx, whites and blacks and whites and Latinx folks. When UJP discovered that, we wrote to both the county executive and the police commissioner. Those data were corrected, removed, but we never got any response from either the commissioner or the county executive on those issues. We're still waiting for a response. So that's number one. The other thing is that Suffolk Police Department is again looking at serious litigation about racism in their police practices around Latinx people in our community. There's a lawsuit that's been going on since 2015, and just last week, there was a recommendation that a class action be certified. That's a big deal. It's not final yet, but the recommendation was made that the Latinx plaintiffs and other similarly situated Latinx members of the community in Suffolk be combined into a class. And what are the allegations? Insufficient data, continued racial bias in traffic stops, the Sergeant Green case that we all know about, where he was literally pulling people over and robbing them. And one of the asks in the litigation, which is where I'm heading with this, is that the county be ordered to set up a CCRB. So this is a long journey, but I'm optimistic actually, because now there has been some light shed on the actual practices of the police department. And I'm saying, the commissioner said, the police do what the bosses, what the commissioner and the heads tell them to do. And that's exactly right. So at that level, there has to be reform and oversight. Our plan calls for oversight. And the more that you, members of the public, start really paying attention and then asking questions saying, why is the SCPD being sued again still for racism in policing of BIPOC communities? Why still? This has been going on since at least 2007 when Marcelo Lucero was murdered. It's time for all of us to say enough. We don't want to pay these huge taxes for a police department that doesn't fairly protect us all.
Dwayne, just to answer your question again, mandatory policing about bad acts of their brethren and sistren is something that's clearly needed and discussed. We also talk about the need to intervene. And we see that very clearly, just as I said before, just last week and on February 24th, the beating of Mr. Christopher Cruz, when 12 to 15 officers sat there, engaged in it and watched it, and nobody said anything, but for a happenstance, and I will say this, a happenstance, it would not have been brought to anyone's attention because that one level of body camera was reviewed by another supervisor. And that reality is something that we've got to deal with, that talks to us about the culture of policing and the closeness of the relationships that allow such a thing to happen.
Let me just add to that, that it is already policy in Suffolk County that police officers intervene and report.
Right.
That policy is not being enforced internally.
Right.
And the Suffolk County plan says, well, we're going to bring in some more training. Training without enforcement internally, which happens through data collection and analysis, doesn't work. So I beg you, beg you, beg you, tell the county. They must make public real data about their policing practices, because there will be no meaningful reform without that.
Fabulous. And with that, just a minute left on the clock and not seeing any other questions. I am going to pass this on to Emily and close this out by saying, you know, we appreciate all the time that the last 20 or so of you have stayed with us to discuss with us the People's Plan. That's how we know you're engaged in the People's Plan, by asking these comprehensive questions, so that hopefully you can go into your communities and talk with your elected officials and your county executives about the People's Plan and help us push it forward. Emily has advised me that at 6 o'clock we will be showing a video. However, this is the end of the People's Plan presentation. So we do encourage you all, if you would like to stay on with us, to watch this inspiring video that features our near and dear speaker, Fred Brewington, providing with us his spoken word prowess, and just further complementing the need for the People's Plan. So you are more than welcome to stay on with us as we present that. If you've seen it before, you know, you're more than welcome to enjoy the rest of your Sunday. So with no further ado, Emily.
All right, so I'm actually going to give, well, before anybody leaves, please, 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 if you haven't seen the full plan, I put it in the chat, liunited.org, lifeba.org is where you can find it. You can download the full plan, download the one-pagers. Please share it. And don't forget about these events. Keep an eye on your email. But with that, Fred, if you want to introduce the video, and everyone sit back, you have an important 9 minutes in front of you.
Sure. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. I'm sure the people know what that number represents. I'm sure Robert does, as I look at him. And thank you, Robert, for your comments. Any quotes that you got, use them. But that's the time that it took for us to watch the murder of George Floyd. 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So I sat down one night to write a letter, and it turned out that I started writing spoken word. The letter started turning into telling the story about why we were so frustrated, particularly in Nassau, about the fact that they wouldn't even talk about race, the fact that they wouldn't even talk about any of the issues which impacted why we were doing this thing called police reform under Executive Order 203. And it came out that we decided to lay it down in rap. And we laid it down in rap, and we call this a protest docu-rap. It's a new form. I've checked with my brothers and sisters that do music, and you know, I have a gospel group that travels, but we talked. They said, "Is there such a thing?" And I said, "No." Well, let's make it up. So we did, and it's called a protest docu-rap. It is intended to be a little longer than the 3 minutes that you play on the radio. Why? Because it's intended to match up with the time that it took for that thing to happen, that we felt and saw on our handhelds, the death of George Floyd. So I'll ask you to turn up your volume if you like a good beat and listen to the words that we talk about. The two things that are important that make it a docu-rap is the fact that a portion of it is the executive order in rap, and another portion of it is an email, one of my late night emails that we wrote to the county executive of Nassau, asking the question about race. And we put that to rap too. So enjoy a walk to the People's Plan, but more than enjoy it, take it to heart, because that's why we're doing the work that we do. Go ahead, Emily.
It was the thunder of voices and masses in the streets that shook the timbers and conscience of those in the suites. The man at the split of Western where state begins made it clear the change for police was to be the end. Not an option, no option. He made a plan to rethink, imagine, bring it to the brink. To end the abuse, the contempt, the lack of respect. All had to be rectified with 400 years of subjugation. Had to be the point of origination. It had to be realized, it had to be dropped. This ongoing misinformation, the lies had to be stopped. He said, take it, Sergio. Whereas, beginning on May 25th, 2020, following the police-involved death of George Floyd in Minnesota, protests have taken place daily throughout the nation and in communities across New York State in response to police-involved deaths and racially biased law enforcement to demand change, action, and accountability. And whereas there's a long and painful history in New York State of discrimination and mistreatment of Black and African American citizens dating back to the arrival of the first enslaved Africans in America. And whereas this recent history includes a number of incidents involving the police that have resulted in the deaths of unarmed civilians, predominantly Black and African American men, that have undermined the public's confidence and trust in our system of law enforcement and criminal justice. And such condition is ongoing and urgently needs to be rectified. And whereas these deaths in New York State include those of Anthony Baez, Amadou Diallo, Usman Zango, Sean Bell, Ramarley Graham, Patrick Dorisman, Akai Gurley, Eric Gardner, amongst others. And in other states include Oscar Grant, Trayvon Martin, Michael Brown, Tamir Rice, Laquan McDonald, Walter Scott, Freddie Gray, Philando Castile, Antoine Rose Jr., Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and George Floyd, amongst others. Whereas these needless deaths have led me to sign into law the Say Their Name agenda, which reforms aspects of policing in New York State. And whereas government has a responsibility to ensure that all of its citizens are treated equally, fairly, and justly before the law. And whereas recent outpouring of protests and demonstrations which have been manifested in every area of the state have illustrated the depth and the breadth of the concern. And whereas Black lives matter, and whereas the foregoing compels me to conclude that urgent and immediate action is needed to eliminate racial inequities in policing, to modify and modernize policing strategies, policies, procedures, and practices, and to develop practices to better address the particular needs of communities of color, to promote public safety, improve community engagement, and foster trust. And the response from Nassau was slow and confused, like an addict on the street with no intended change. They refuse, coming with denial and excuses and refusal to listen, as though it was a chore, knowing all the time what they were throwing was tainted to the core. Run the clock while we invite them in. We wind them, we dine them, and pretend to be a friend. While all this was happening, the plot was being set. The game was afoot, and the intent was to reject. Starting from the top, reject the connection, reject the input, reject the ideas, and reject. Damn. So much rejection, and then the betrayal in broad daylight and the lies. Opening up on air and online, saying, here's our plan to the whole world, while those who were at the table to be a part and to make a plan able said, what? You told us you had no draft. You lied. lied, damned again, over again. A simple request was made in the light of evidence relayed, that truth be told, not for boast or want to be bold. So cleansing would be the call of the day, a marker, a point of departure, so that no voice would be silenced by denials, and to allow opponents to be changed to realizers rather than be rivals. The aim was to be seekers for healing instead of enemies. So what you did was refuse to engage on what the man from Street of State said was to be the real parade. It came to pass, and this was the simple ask.
The request is to Nassau County, the county executive, and the commissioner of police. Here is the request, to which I respectfully seek a simple response. In looking at the numbers produced by the Nassau County PD, which were then calculated and analyzed by community members of LIAFPA, as depicted in the attachment, and looking at just one slide taken from the PowerPoint presentation offered by Jeff Painter Esquire of the Nassau County District Attorney's Office, content is listed below. Will you admit that there are serious issues of inequity and racial disparities resulting from arrests by Nassau County Police?
You would not answer, and you have not answered. Your denial is a disease, and your arrogance a sickness that led to just what was expected. A 310-page document. You boast to be a plan for reform, but you know it's only 57 pages of the current norm. Stuffed with filler at best, and lined with nothingness in the rest. You prop yourself up as doing this with support. Arms locked with the people, but there must be a retort. You never shared, you never showed, you never offered, and you never told that a plan was being presented. Instead, when questioned, you showed just how you resented being questioned, when that was the only path that would uncover, disclose, and unmask the betrayal that was being perpetrated for all to see. And you didn't care. So we rise up and present that which we know will demonstrate what we can do and what we can do. Not being daunted by your purposeful refusal to open your gates and open your eyes and see. The people's plan, we say, is bold, not old. It's open and available to see and to be the change that we want to be. Ours is an invitation. Ours is innovation. Ours is provided with arms open wide to engage, and not done under the cover of surprise, but offered with the words of the poetess Maya Angelou ringing clear in our ears and before our eyes. You may shoot me with your words. You may cut me with your eyes. You may kill me with your hatefulness, but still like air I rise.
Leaving behind nights of terror and fear, I rise into a daybreak that's wondrously clear. I rise,
bringing the gifts that my ancestors gave. I am the dream. I am the hope of the slave. I rise. I rise. I rise. We rise and present the people's plan. Rise up. Rise up. Rise up. Rise up.
Amazing. Thank you for everyone for staying on and joining us. I hope that you've not only learned everything that you feel you need to learn about the People's Plan, but are really, truly incredibly proud to be a Long Islander, to be a Nassau-Suffolk County resident, because this plan, this document was absolutely, was created by your neighbors, your friends and family that live here on the island with you. And that is something that I don't believe anyone anywhere has ever seen. The level of comprehensive, collaborative, intergenerational, multiracial individuals that participated in finalizing this document to make policing and community safety accessible to everyone and for everyone, police officers included. So I hope you're incredibly proud, not only of us, but of yourself for living on such a forward-thinking and progressive island. So I encourage all of you to please endorse the People's Plan, share the People's Plan in one pager. You'll be given, you'll be sent an email that has additional information, the slides and access to the documents, all the documents that you need, as well as upcoming dates and events. We're in our crunch time right now. We have until I believe sometime in April to finally get, consensus on what police reforms are going to be implemented across the county. So I strongly encourage all of you to officially take up the mantle with your fellow Long Island residents that have presented the People's Plan to you and have been working on the People's Plan with you in mind. Please, please, please call Nassau and Suffolk County executives and demand that they support the People's Plan. With no further ado, and if I am not missing anything else, I bid you all farewell. Have a happy Sunday.
Peace.
Good night, everyone.
Right.